You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer.
Hey, listeners, we're on a roll this morning. We are firing. We've got some really great smart banter going, which means this episode might be a dud.
Yeah, we just missed it all.
We went off too early, but so let's bring it back. We need to have some merch for sale because we're now a successful podcast, right?
Yes.
So I'm suggesting that we start a line of Center for Auto Safety sleepwear made out of recycled tires and spare parts from Ford Pintos that have been decommissioned as part of, the influence of this show on automotive safety. What do you guys think?
How old do you think this show is that we played a part in getting the Ford Pinto off the road?
We've been around for a while. I think we're up to over 150 episodes now, aren't we?
We are. Hey, listeners, if you've been with us since day one, we'll see you at Thanksgiving. But this is the start of season 4 of this show. They said it couldn't be done.
Well, talking about listener loyalty, my sister, the number one fan, said that Michael rightfully won the Gaslight of the Week award last week. And it was a wonderful thing, I suppose, for you, Michael, but it doesn't speak well for family loyalty, does it?
Well, it speaks well for the U.S. mail. It means she got my check.
And she didn't share it with me. Another slam against family loyalty.
Oh, no. Hey, listeners, today is July 30th, also known as the day that the EPA decided the environment schmirement. The head of the EPA, a Weasley little man named Lee Zeldin, is basically saying, hey, I bet we can get rid of environmental regulations. What does this mean for auto safety and people who use the road and people who breathe? It means, we're not going to have regulations around the pollution that comes out of your tailpipe. But Ford kind of vaguely pushed back from an article in the Washington Post. Ford said in a statement that it appreciated President Donald Trump's orange skin and Zeldin's work to address the imbalance between current emissions standards and customer choice, like breathing, but added that the government should establish a new standard. America needs a single, stable standard to foster business planning. The standard should align with science and customer choice, again, the right to breathe, reduce carbon emissions by getting more stringent over time, and grow American manufacturing. So Ford's basically saying, hey, what we've been doing for the last, since the mid-'70s when Nixon started the EPA.
Nixon.
Yeah. When good old Tricky Dicky started the EPA. Let's keep with that program because we've built our business around that model since the mid-'70s.
Yeah, and let's not lose sight of why that. A primary reason for why that came about in the first place was the leaded gasoline that GM invented, right? And was polluting the air everywhere. And, even in the development of leaded gasoline, there were a lot of people being killed in factories. I mean, they knew it was a carcinogen. They knew it was a bad thing, and yet put it in the gasoline for, the majority of cars in America. So, this all somewhat started as an outgrowth of auto industry overreach.
Well, the Ethel Corporation down in Richmond, Virginia, was the source for a lot of the tetraethyl lead that was added to the cars to increase octane. And they're standing by with a manganese-based compound that would do essentially the same thing. So rather than lead poisoning, they prefer to have manganese poisoning. So hopefully this administration isn't so benighted that they push that forward, but standing by for a press release from Richmond on the benefits of manganese in the air.
Yeah, well, and the Clean Air Act goes well beyond cars, right? I mean, and even in cars, there are other issues like electric vehicles rely on power that, it may be sustainably sourced. It's probably not. It's probably coming from gas or coal-fired power plants, which the Clean Air Act regulates and prevents those plants from emitting bad things into the atmosphere. So, whether it's gas or electric, there are only downsides here in terms of pollution and emissions.
This episode brought to you by neurotoxicity. You might not be dead yet, but one day you will be. Speaking of somebody who might be having lead poisoning, Congressman Vince Fong. Congressman Vince Fong, he introduced landmark legislation to streamline AV trucking and strengthen national supply chain. Now, that's a headline that makes me know this guy didn't read the bill, and if he did, he doesn't understand it. This was written by some PR flax for the AV industry. Specifically, this bill will establish a federal framework over state laws requiring human drivers in commercial vehicles with level 4 or level 5 ADAS. Update federal definitions to include ADS-equipped vehicles, align ADS levels with Society of Automotive Engineers International Standards that authorizes the interstate testing and operation of fully automated trucks without human or remote drivers on board. Now, first of all, ADS, isn't it ADAS?
Now, ADAS is
different.
Different. So ADAS is basically the level 2 stuff that's operating on a lot of vehicles. ADS stands for Automated Driving System, which is one of the terms that's used for autonomous vehicles.
Okay. And then, Fred, question to you. Are you a member of the Society of Automotive Engineers? Or are you a member of SAE?
I am guilty.
No. Which one is it? Because didn't they just change their name to just SAE?
No, it's been SAE International for a while now. It's no longer Society for Automotive Engineers.
That's what I mean. Okay.
Yeah. I'd also point out that when the congressman refers to conformance with standards, there are no standards. Even the one he cites, J3016, is a report and reported best practice, but it's specifically not a standard. So this law as written basically says there are no standards. So be fruitful and multiply.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. And, one of the main things going on in this bill is aligning the federal definition of automated vehicles with the SAE's version, which, as we have pointed out on numerous occasions, creates a lot of problems, including the level 2 loophole that allows vehicles to pretend to be something they're not, a la Tesla. So it's a bad bill, and it's not just bad because of that. It's bad because it does the same thing that most industry-supported autonomous vehicle bills do. It says, we've got this huge problem, the patchwork of laws in all these states. We need Congress to eliminate those in exchange for federal laws and regulations that give us, one base system to operate under. But the way they try to do it is to have the federal law kick in once. They want a framework that basically preempts state laws now, and then we wait for 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30 years. How long is it going to take to actually have a federal regulatory framework around autonomous vehicles? We don't know. And so in that time period, the industry is in complete control. States can't tell them what to do, and there's no federal law telling them what to do. It's a huge problem. It's a problem of putting the cart before the horse that virtually every autonomous vehicle bill we've seen over the last decade has had. And, there's never going to be an autonomous vehicle bill that safety organizations can even come close to supporting if it results in that kind of regulatory, black hole. Essentially, there's going to be a period of time in these types of bills where there's no federal law, states can't do anything, cities can't do anything, and autonomous vehicle manufacturers have their way and do whatever they want. So that's a huge problem with this bill. The SAE issue is a problem. They also, there's some weird language in the bills introduced. There's one part that says the secretary may not issue a regulation that unduly burdens motor carriers operating ADS-equipped vehicles or discriminates against an ADS-equipped vehicle relative to other commercial vehicles. So here we go. We've got congressmen trying to pass anti-discrimination measures that would favor ADS vehicles. Very odd provision. They're obviously things that are going to have to be different for ADS and commercial and regular commercial vehicles. and virtually every time the Secretary of Transportation would even try to pass a regulation that impacts ADS equipped commercial vehicles and not regular ones, the industry is going to come in and say, oh, that's unduly burdensome, and point to this provision and try to get it thrown out. So this bill has, that's one of many problems with this bill. There's also some issues with, because the federal law requires, a warning triangle that is set outside of the truck if there's a crash or the breakdown to warn oncoming cars. They're trying to wipe out that requirement with this legislation in exchange for allowing people to use a flashing cab mounting beacon that hasn't even really been studied or vetted for safety or to show that it can actually help drivers avoid a commercial vehicle that's stalled on the side of the road. So, it's not a very well thought out bill. It continues along the same path of a lot that we've seen before that have been really problematic.
Yeah, but Michael, what about freedom? Shouldn't the truck manufacturers be free to do whatever they want?
I mean, I won't jump into my rant, but it seems like everything that might make money someday in America is viewed as good these days and part of our freedoms. And I think we can clearly see examples of the opposite, even where some of our social media and other things are headed that are unregulated in many ways. A lot of the tech industry that's gone unregulated, we've seen a lot of negative impacts in America from that. I don't think that can be denied. It's become entrenched in our politics and in a lot of other areas where we might have set some safeguards at one point instead of allowing for all this freedom, and it's not even. Okay, I'll stop there.
Wow, you're going on full Fred Perkins mode there. That was pretty good.
I will stop right there. But that's a huge problem. Is this anything that makes money is great and shouldn't be regulated. I hear this over and over for virtually everything the auto industry, since that's what we're focused on. I'm sure this happens in every other industry, but there just seems to be this acceptance because something might drive the economy that it's automatically a good thing. And that's something I think we're seeing here. There's not a lot of proof that AV trucking is safe. We just saw a couple of months ago where Aurora had to put safety drivers back in its trucks because the manufacturer of the trucks was scared for liability reasons. I mean, when you see that kind of thing, it makes you wonder why the congressmen are so intent on removing any type of oversight of that industry.
Are you familiar with lobbying?
Well, for our listeners who don't follow this quite as closely as we do, the Aurora free-range trucking experiment lasted exactly 2 weeks from the time they first put a driverless truck on the road until the manufacturer of that truck demanded that they put a human driver back in place. So not very promising.
This legislation, specifically states that, an autonomous, an ADS equipped commercial vehicle does not have to have either a safety driver or a remote driver. So they're basically saying we don't need a human backup in any way, shape, or form to call something an ADS, which at this point in the development of these vehicles, I think is a incredibly bad step.
Another detail in this bill that's missing is a provision for safety inspection of the vehicles. So there is no, these are big vehicles barreling down the highway at pretty high speed. Currently, state police can stop any vehicle, any commercial vehicle, and do a spot check to make sure that its safety equipment is up and operating. The tires are good. Driver's log is up to date, and all those kind of basic things that assure as much as it can be the safety of the operating of this big heavy vehicle. But there's no provision in here to do that. There's no design provision that says there's visibility into the safety parameters of the truck for police to monitor the safety. There is basically no way in the world for the state police to even stop the vehicles to do a check or to find out what the safety information is that's pertinent for this vehicle. So this is a disaster in the making.
Is there any update on the Aurora situation where they're like, no, you're putting a human back inside the car? Is that human still inside the cab?
I think the
I'm
human's still
assuming
there.
they are.
Yeah.
I think, was it Packer or it was
Yeah,
a
I don't
heavy
remember
truck
what it was.
manufacturer that they were engaged with that I think primarily for liability reasons said,
Yeah.
we can't have this. And they took
But
some money back.
Aurora touts the transparency of their safety design, so I'm sure that any day now we'll be getting an update.
Hey, if they're touting it, it must be good. My other question related to this is because I did a long drive the last couple of days, and there's signs for weigh station. Weigh stations open. Trucks that weigh more than 2.5 tons. And I'm like, every car on the road has to get weighed. Do autonomous robot trucks, or do they know how to navigate these weigh stations?
Good question. I don't have the answer.
Don't you need a person there to like? It's not just you drive up on a scale and be like, bye. Aren't they? Isn't there more of an
That's just
interaction?
one of many kind of issues there. These autonomous trucks have been, promoted when their makers are being careful, promoted as a way to drive goods down the interstate towards, like hubs where then a local delivery driver would pick it up and take them into the cities, right?
Right.
Under this bill, you're exempting cities and states from being able to do anything or control anything around that. So, technically the drivers, cities couldn't say, hey, no autonomous heavy trucks in our cities. And that poses a huge problem when there's no evidence right now that these vehicles could operate safely in American cities. And yet we've got Congress trying to pass legislation that preempts cities and states from even touching their operations. So it's very troubling from that perspective.
The deep state has infiltrated the cities, folks. They're coming for you. Speaking of nonsense, Ford. The Detroit Free Press has a good article that is unfortunately paywalled, titled "Ford has spent 18 months trying to fix quality problems that costing the company billions. Part of their way to do this is they're infantilizing their workforce by having large displays in their buildings that have a green smiley face saying, we're doing good, or a red frowny face saying, uh-oh, something's not working. If I work there, I'd be like, why can't I get a job at GM? No, seriously, Ford, as we've talked about, that's the quality of Ford lately. But Ford is saying, hey, we're making changes to its quality process, including my favorite one is more rigorous procedures around new vehicle launches. What the hell does that mean?
There's a lot in this article. It's quite a long article, and that we talked last week, I believe, maybe the week before, about Ford's way out in front of every other manufacturer this year in terms of recalls, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that NHTSA clamped down on them in November of last year with a massive fine. And Ford is having to, jump through a lot of hoops, redo a lot of recalls. I think in the article it says 33. I think we're higher than that now, or what they're calling recalls, where it's a recall from the last few years that didn't work. They're going back and redoing it. But Ford is, at least from the article, Bryce Curry, who is apparently the guy who is now in charge of Ford quality there, it basically admits that, this is Ford's low point and that he's there to make things better. And the way he's doing it is probably the most interesting part of the article to me. He's going to Japan. He's going to Toyota, and he's looking at their processes. The word sensei. How do you pronounce that, Anthony? I know
Sensei.
you're a karate kid.
Nah.
Yeah, sensei comes up, and they're really looking at the way the Japanese do auto manufacture.
They should have done that in 1990.
They probably should have, but now they really seem to be embracing it. They're talking about Pokiyoki. You know what that means? It means a mistake proofing device, essentially preventing errors by making sure they can't happen. So there's a lot of discussion of that. It's a lot of positive talk. I mean, it looks like Ford is really trying to do something good here. I hope to God that they do well and get better cars out on the road, because I'm tired of talking about Ford recalls. But other than that, it's a process, and it's every car is a tough thing to get out on the road without defects. I don't know, Ford seems to have been doing a really, really poor job in the 20 teens and the early 2020s of getting their arms around this. And, hopefully this will help them do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Michael, because they said in here that, to disagree with you, the article says the changes, their safety changes are self-motivated. They're doing this. But it also says they're doing this under a consent order.
Yeah,
But that's their self-motivation is a court said you got to do this. But I can't believe that this is actually Ford's low point. Ford, the Edsel? Come on.
No, that's Ford Firestone. That was a tough period for them. I don't believe that they didn't have to take a bailout when GM and Chrysler did. I don't believe
they opted not to. I appreciated that as a taxpayer.
But they've had some low points. In terms of safety, this has absolutely got to be there. There's so many vehicles affected here. They're losing billions of dollars due to these problems. And the recalls are, it's an outrageous number now. I think they're up over 90 for the year, and the closest manufacturer to them probably is around 20. So they're outpacing the industry. I think they're responsible for around maybe even more than a fifth of all recalls that have been issued this year.
Yeah. A friend I was just visiting with had a 2022 Ford F-150, and he keeps bringing it back into the dealer because the edutainment display system is like, warning, everything's failed. And so, of course, I go to autosafety.org and look up a recall, but there's not a specific recall on this. And I'm like, come on, it's the backup camera. But Ford so far has not been.
That's a good guess.
That is an excellent guess. And I learned that by going to autosafety.org and clicking on that red donate button. You can too. Hey, let's go to our, because it's sweltering today in the United States. Fred, is it sweltering by you as well?
We're in the swelterer. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Bob.
Well, where it's less sweltering is our neighbors to the north, soon to be the 51st state, Canada. The New York Times has an article titled Drivers versus Cyclists, a battle for the streets in Canada's largest city. And so what happens is Toronto put in really protected bike lanes. It looks like in New York City, they're just like, there's just some paint on the street. And I guess under the law that's protected, but Canada looks like they put in some physical barriers here, and traffic is really bad in Canada. And they're like, this is bad. The bike lanes, the bikes are so big. They're taking up so much of our streets. I got to get to the Leafs game and I got to walk. Yeah. But my takeaway from this article is quoting, many commuters also argue that driving to Toronto from the suburbs is often faster than using public transportation, with experts saying that the city lacks enough rapid transit to meet its needs. The provincial government has been criticized for long delays to transit projects. So what I'm trying to get at is once we annex Canada, it'll be no different than any other U.S. city.
If you look at Toronto's, subway map, for a city of that size, it appears relatively sparse.
Right.
It's, I'm in the DC area generally, and the metro system there, while it can be great for folks who live in proximity to a station, it's a little lacking for people who live further out of the city, and it just doesn't hit certain spots. And it seems like Toronto's is similar. I think DC just came in at number 1 in the worst traffic in America on this year's report from consumeraffairs.com. So they're not doing well, partially because of the lack of opportunities there. And I think Toronto is kind of in the same bucket here. They just, they don't have a lot of good ways to get into downtown Toronto other than by car. And because of that, they're experiencing tons of traffic. They don't have congestion pricing yet, Anthony.
They should. I think they'd be great at it. Continuing with dangerous bikes and strange things. New York City, place I've been to. So Michael sent this article titled 6 Inane Arguments Mayor Adams is Using to Defend Ripping Up the Bedford Avenue Bike Lane. And he said, I need this to be translated from New York to English. Yes. And so what happens is Bedford Avenue is this strip in hipster Williamsburg, and it's just a straight road with like a bunch of shops normally on it. And it's a commuter street. It's had a bike lane there for a while, and there's a lot of hipsters there riding their bikes and non-hipsters riding their bikes. And what the argument, essentially, I'll break it down for you of why they want to rip out these bike lanes is because in that area of Williamsburg, there's a large religious cult, doomsday cult, that all votes in a block. And so every politician in New York City, they listen to this doomsday cult called the Hasidics. And they're like, okay, you guys want this out, we'll rip this out. You can look into this. It is a doomsday cult. They've been calling for the end times for a long time. It's hilarious.
So this is just a political play.
This is politics, plain and simple. Because the argument is like, well, our private school buses for the Hasidic community where we don't teach things like English or math or girls, it doesn't know where to stop. And if we have to stop in a bike lane, don't give us a ticket. And so the mayor's office is like, let's get rid of bike lanes, doomsday cult. It might not be a popular take or a more common one, but it is the truth. And that's my opinion. Now back to the Center for Auto Safety.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of obscene that they're even considering that. But politics is politics. We see all sorts of crazy things happen, don't we?
Yep.
But like Toronto here, they're trying to rip up bike lanes and they're experiencing some significant outcry. Was it the Toronto article? Maybe it was this New York article where they interviewed the head of a local bike safety group who was in the hospital after being hit by a car.
That was the Toronto one.
Yeah.
In this article, I have a good quote, though. Though the Department of Transportation noted that overall injuries among cyclists and pedestrians were down 47% in the portion of Bedford Avenue following the 2024 redesign, not all collisions were reported to the police. That's part of their argument. But well, hey, look, all injuries went down this massive amount, but hey, probably not all of them were talked about. So it's probably a spike. We got to get rid of this stuff. Do whatever these cultists say.
Well, I like the part of that report that said, we really can't enforce the law in New York, so we're going to give up.
I like that one as well because, why enforce the law?
Right. That's inconvenient. It requires policemen and courts and stuff like that. So I've visited New York sporadically, and I have noted that people tend to violate the bike lanes pretty regularly.
Well, I saw it might be true because I remember a couple of years ago, there's kids in my neighborhood and they're on dirt bikes riding through the street, riding in the wrong lanes, going up on sidewalks and whatnot. There's a cop car coming by in the SUV, and my wife's like, aren't you guys going to stop these kids? And the response was, why? They would just drive away.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow. Why would I do my job, man? That's ridiculous. Anyway, New York City, it's safe. It actually is. Let's jump on to another cultist, Tesla. That's right. So the Elon has been claiming for a while that San Francisco's next for our robotaxi. We've expanded our area in Austin. And now in Austin, he won't say how much he's expanded it or what it is. And it's a pretty tight little operating design domain for that. And in San Francisco, Michael, will these be like Waymo Cruise type robo-taxis that Tesla's deploying?
I don't think they're deploying anything like Waymo or Cruise robo-taxis. First of all, they don't have the permits to operate a autonomous vehicle in San Francisco at the moment. They're going to have a driver in the driver's seat. So basically what you're paying for here is not a robo-taxi ride. It's just like an Uber, because you're going to have a driver in the driver's seat using presumably full self-driving to take you, and the driver's going to be monitoring it and intercede if necessary. But it's clearly nothing like what Waymo's already doing out there. And I'm a little surprised they're going to San Francisco since, Waymo kind of owns the roads there and is actually doing autonomous driving without a remote operator that can take over any time. I think Waymo's remote operators only take over to guide the vehicle after it's stuck. They don't have people behind monitors with steering wheels ready to take over when the camera system fails, like Tesla does. So it's I don't know. I don't believe, it's hard to believe 90% of the stuff coming out of Tesla these days after all the hijinks they've pulled. So yeah, I guess they're going to San Francisco, but they're basically operating a glorified Uber service.
Yeah, quoting from the article, the permit allows Tesla to provide ride-sharing services with a safety driver behind the wheel of vehicles using its driver assistance systems, a lawyer for the car maker told California DMV. So basically, they got a permit to operate a taxi. They're like, isn't it cool?
Yeah. So Phil Koopman forecast this a couple of months ago when he was on the show. Basically, the strategy for Tesla is no doubt that they'll put these vehicles on the road saying they're just level 2, so don't bother us. We have a safety driver. Then they'll accumulate X number of miles. Then they'll go back to the regulators and say, well, look, we've accumulated X miles. We haven't killed anybody yet. So give us a permit to just let us go full autonomous. We're not like these other companies that are trying to convince you that their technology is great before they've tried it out. We, Tesla, are so forthright that we're trying out the technology with these safety drivers, and we've now gone far enough so we can assert with high confidence that we're perfectly safe and ready to go, and we're just going to jump over to full autonomy using this same software.
High confidence.
I think that's so. I think that's where they're headed. And 6 months from now, we'll see statements coming out of Tesla saying that we've proven our safety. It's time to go. Time to get the regulators out of the way and let us improve efficiency and economy and save the world and yada yada. All of the things that Tesla believes that they can do.
I disagree, Fred. And I think in 6 months' time, Tesla will be saying, we've never been a car company. We've always been a rocket ship company, AI robot throwing company. I don't know what you're talking about. These cars don't exist.
Oh, that may well be. We'll see.
Yeah. And that gets me to my gaslight of the week because it's Tesla adjacent. That's right. There's a man named Sandy Munro, and he runs a consulting firm called Munro Associates. And at one point, they might have been doing great engineering work and whatnot. But now, as I can tell, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, they're essentially just a PR firm for Tesla and Elon Musk. That's everything they do is just everything Elon does is amazing. As what I'm trying to say is Sandy Munro has done some deep colonoscopy work for Elon. He's really, he's got to brush his teeth again. So they have this video where a couple of their employees, this guy, Paul Turnbull, takes a Tesla robotaxi in Austin and basically says it's great. And their first left turn in this video, it does it wrong. It can't get into the correct left turn lanes. The safety driver is immediately like, oh no, this car is stuck in the intersection. And you hear this in the video. Can you navigate us out of this intersection, please? No one in the car can, because that's not going to happen. So in the back seat, these passengers, they ask questions like, how often do you have to intervene? They ask the safety person sitting in the passenger seat, and his response is, yeah, I'm not comfortable talking about work. Good for him. He wants to keep his job. This Paul Turnbull guy, he's as clearly his retirement is totally tied up with Tesla stock as well. He's really glossing over everything. He's like, we've had one incident that was unusual. How would you know? How would you know that this is unusual versus the usual behavior of these things? He continues, I've not experienced it. This is a quote from him. I've not experienced it, but I've heard that the Waymo has trouble with construction. Like, now you're just like a teenager making shit up. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Most of this driving is happening under 35 miles per hour. Actually, they never went above 35 miles per hour. More like it was close to roughly 20 miles per hour. Very short streets. Not a lot of difficult things happening. So the Paul Turnbull continues to say, human Uber drivers, they use FSD to keep stress on the job down so you don't have to drive every second. Wait a second. Once you have, these ADAS systems and whatnot, you don't have to drive every second. You can just disconnect from reality, man. No, you're You're a company that's supposed to be doing safety engineering. Right off the bat, you're like, fuck it. And lastly, he gets into this Paul Turnbull. He says, this is the reason we need AVs. He said, my dad is in his mid 90s. AVs are great for him. I'm like, how? Like, how is it? And he continues to go on, like, if you're in your mid 90s, you're like, he wants to go out and drive whenever he can. Like, no. And basically says, when it comes to Uber, they just don't trust the driver. So your dad's old and racist. I get it. So I have 1,000 issues with this on so many levels. Again, if you're in your mid 90s, you may or may not have some sort of mobility issues. You probably need a driver in the car to help you in and out. You've got packages. I mean, I want a person there. I don't want to be like, well, shit, I'm at my destination. Can you open the door? But that's just me. That's my gaslight of the week.
That's not bad. Shall we go to mine?
Not bad. All right.
Well, I question whether that's more bullshit or gaslight, but
I mean, the amount of fluff they do to this, saying how amazing it is, and honestly, like Tesla in a tiny, tightly mapped area of Austin, like they should have the entire city mapped down perfectly, and they still can't fucking drive. Come on.
Well, that's a good point, but since gaslight's become competitive, got to make sure that we got the rules down here. So I'm gonna go with a gaslight. It's associated with a test of automatic driving systems that was done in China, and it was very interesting because they actually took 36 different self-driving model cars, put them on the road to see what they could do. They had standardized maneuvers. They had fake pigs on the road. They had cars that were obscured at some point. And, they saw how the vehicles did. And some did pretty well and some did worse. There were a lot of fake pigs that were killed. There were a lot of mock-up cars that were crashed into. But the point of this is that in America, land of the free and home of the brave, what we hear from the companies who are producing these automatic driving systems are that there's no way they should be regulated, and there's no way they should be included in anything like NCAP because that would stifle innovation. There are no qualified technicians outside of the AV companies who can do this. But parenthetically, if the ADAS and AV systems are safe, so why do we need to have specially trained people to test them? But I digress. They're asserting that the miles they've driven prove that they're safe. The U.S. relies on self-certification, so there's no justification for testing the vehicles to see if they're relatively safe. Industry standards are sufficient, they're saying, even though no standards actually exist. And also the sky is cloudy. So what's interesting about that is that with all this rationale for why they don't want to participate in any tests, yet they're perfectly happy to go to China. The companies involved who are doing business in the U.S. who are there are Mercedes, Tesla, Volkswagen, Toyota, Honda, all of whom are doing business in the U.S. And they're all happy to participate in these standardized tests in China, which they plan to do every year to show comparisons between these automatic driving systems produced by these various people. So my Gaslight Award goes to all of these manufacturers, VW, Mercedes, Toyota, Honda, for saying that they don't need to and actually should not do any kind of comparative testing in the United States while they are happily participating in these standardized tests in China, proving that standardized tests can be established for them and that they are useful to establish absolute safety, whether or not they ran into a fake pig, for example, and the relative safety. How did they do compared to their competitors in the market? So there you go. It's kind of a broad brush gaslight, but I'm giving that nomination to all of the people in the AV industry who are not making America's roads safer and who do not want to provide any data that would allow us to compare which work better than any others.
So what you're trying to tell me is that if a market's large enough, that these manufacturers will do whatever the regulators want them to do?
So it seems, yes.
Oh, a shame the U.S. is such a tiny, tiny part of the world economy. On to Michael Brooks.
That sounds like something, Congressman Fong would say. I'm dipping back into the truck autonomy thing. Fong is wrong. So let's see. While Europe, and here's what he says, while Europe and China are rapidly integrating autonomous trucks into their supply chains, I don't know that I buy that, but that's what they want us to believe. America is asleep at the wheel, hamstrung by a confusing patchwork of state regulations that threaten public safety. These state regulations threaten public safety. You may want to look at a different press office writer here for that. Innovation and economic growth. By establishing a federal framework for autonomous trucks and empowering the Department of Transportation to set practical regulations, we can safely scale this emerging technology nationwide. When in fact, what the bill he has proposed does, it eliminates the state regs, which are the only thing currently protecting Americans from bad autonomy. The state regulations certainly aren't threatening public safety. I don't know where in the hell they came up with that. And as I discussed earlier, the federal framework that they're trying to stand up isn't going to be here for a while. It's not going to come next year. It's not going to come in 5 years. It may not come in 20 because, Mr. Fong, the president from your party has just cut the agencies in charge of making those regulations by up to 25%. So I don't see, safety is thrown in as kind of an afterthought into this. This is all about scaling, all about supply chain efficiency, all about domestic commerce, all about making sure that America's unbeatable in the global marketplace. Well, the only real way to get there is to get strong federal regulations around AV safety on the books now. There goes your patchwork for whatever that's worth. If you believe there's an actual patchwork of state regulations holding them back, I don't. This is just clearly Congressman Fong setting up a straw man argument that somehow the states and are in the way of the autonomous vehicle industry. What they ultimately just want is no regulations that apply to them for the next 10 years so they can scale at will. And, ultimately the only thing in that scenario that's going to be helping people who are injured or killed by these vehicles is the trial lawyer bar. I mean, the legal and the liability threat to these companies is the only thing that has helped prevent, Waymo, even Tesla, from going a lot further in their plans than they have gone already. It has nothing to do with the state regs, the patchwork of state regulations. What they're ultimately looking for is a way to preempt state laws, preempt even state laws that apply to litigation and in other areas of product liability, and have basically a free-for-all where they can do whatever they want and try to compete with Europe and China, who, by the way, are both setting strong national and federal requirements at a rate the United States isn't keeping up with. Maybe we should be looking at keeping up with Europe and China in the area of setting regulations rather than watching NHTSA sit on its heels while the autonomous vehicle industry claims that they're being victimized by state regulations. So again, Fong is wrong, and that's the gaslight of the week for me.
That's really good. This is a tough one. I mean, Michael, you got the pithy Fong is wrong, but I'm going strictly based off of passion. And this week, I mean, I was the most passionate. Michael was second. Fred, it was good information, but I didn't feel a lot of fire in the belly there. There was not a lot of, you need to rage more.
This is so unfair. You're clearly prejudiced against tall people.
Well, look, on my screen, you're not that big, so it's not that.
Well, you can adjust that.
But Fred, for you and you alone, we'll go into the Tao of you.
All right. That's some kind of compensation. So, in signal theory or electronic signals and capture and antennas and things like that, basically, you've got an inverse relationship between the bandwidth you need to detect a signal and the frequency of the signal. So that's why in the old days, when you saw a radar antenna at the airport, for example, it was really, really big. And the reason for that is that they were using relatively low frequency to detect the airplanes. Now they have radars in cars, and they're really, really little because they're using very high frequency to detect the presence of other cars. Millimeter wave radars, for example, are really small. They're built into the detectors that you walk through on your way to the airplane at the terminal. So what does this mean for AVs? Well, basically, AVs are trying to convince the world, and have so far convinced the world, that deaths per unit mile driven is a reasonable way to characterize the safety of the AVs. It's not, for this very same reason, because the deaths that occur and the injuries that occur are relatively low frequency. There are many vehicles that will never, happily, that will never kill anybody, right? And there are many that will never injure anybody. But that doesn't mean that the industry is safe or that the public is safe, because you have large numbers of cars that are out there addressing people. So the individual experience of any vehicle doesn't really tell you much about how that vehicle is doing with regard to safety, if your only parameter is something that happens very, very infrequently and may not happen at all. For example, one way you could characterize conventional cars is the number of mountain passes above 14,000 feet they are likely to go through in their entire lifetime. Well, that would tell you something about the cars, but it doesn't tell you anything about what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So I've been ranting about this for a while, and I just wanted to support the rant by saying that what we need to do, and for the companies that are trying to establish their transparency in the safety arena, is they need to establish some criteria that occur day to day that can be used to indicate the safety of these vehicles. In other words, very high frequency, so that we can get our mental bandwidth to wrap around the actual information. So what kind of parameters would that be that show a lot more resolution than deaths per 100 million miles? Well, you could have things like the actual trajectory of the car as it goes through a curve versus the planned trajectory of the car. In other words, how far does the actual motion of the car deviate from the planned motion of the car? And that's something every car could measure every day, could measure it automatically, because you've got the GPS on the one hand that tells you what the actual location is, and then you've got the planned trajectory on the other hand. That's a computer-driven trajectory, right? So you can look at the distance between those. You could also look at, for example, how far away you are from the cars around you. You've got a projection in the vehicle in the computer that says, I'm going to stop X feet away from this car and never come closer than Y inches to any of the moving vehicles around me. Well, you've got sensors that can detect that. So how well does your car conform to the design standards that you built into the car? This is the kind of information that we need to get from these vehicles, because it tells you on a day-to-day basis how well they are conforming to the safety design requirements that you built into the car. Some of these other parameters could be built into the computers itself. For example, you've got a certain amount of RAM, random access memory, available in the computer, and you need this in order to do quick calculations of whether or not there's a human being in front of you, or whether or not there's a child running by the side of the road that you have to avoid. But the computer has requirements to have a certain amount of memory available. So the question that should be asked is, how close are we coming to the margins with a memory that's in the computer that enables the safety calculations versus the actual amount of memory that's in the computer. Okay, this is kind of a standard way of measuring the performance of computers in real-time applications, like controlling a vehicle. We're not seeing any of this. Okay, all we're seeing is the industry pushing us to look at a single parameter, have I killed anybody today, versus all this other information that would let us know objectively how well they're conforming to their design standards. And by the way, what are those design standards? And who approved the idea that you have to stop 3 inches away from a vehicle, right? Why is that a good number? Or 6 inches, or whatever the number is that you've picked. So we need this kind of transparency in order to do a safety evaluation of these AVs before they get on the road and after they're on the road to find out how well they're conforming to the performance that was promised before the regulators approved the use of these vehicles on the highways. So this is a little complicated, but the idea is we need to have a better set of parameters than death per 100 million miles in order to really understand what the safety is available from and actually being delivered by these self-driving vehicles. So does that make sense to you guys, or is that too much inside baseball?
Well, I mean, it's deep, but I get it. So my question is, let's take Uber as an example. They have a ton of sensors on their cars. They're probably collecting all this data, and they are a company that has 2 CEOs. So, they've got 2 people to oversee this because that's a well-run company. But do you think that they're collecting this data and not looking at it, collecting this data, looking at it, analyzing it, and being like, we're transparent, but we're not going to tell people about what we found?
Well, I've got some comments about that transparency later on. Or maybe I can.
You can do it right now. There is no later on. There's just
no
now.
Later on. Okay. So Waymo is talking about transparency, of course. And this week they talked about
Waymo. That's why I meant with the co-CEOs. Sorry, not Uber. I didn't mean to disparage Uber. It's Waymo that says 2 CEOs. That's a well-run company when you need 2 people to do the same job. Yeah,
that's right. That really makes decision-making streamlined, doesn't it?
Oh, it's beautiful.
So if you go to their website, you'll find one page that says Waymo Safety Impact. And then in the Waymo Safety Impact, sorry?
Sorry for that. That is a horrible choice of words for safety around a vehicle company. Safety impact.
It is a little bit ironic, isn't it?
Do it again.
So then they say the trust and safety of the communities where we operate is paramount to us. That's why we're voluntarily sharing our safety data. This data hub compares the Waymo drivers' risk rider-only crash rates to human crash benchmarks for surface streets. It leverages best practices. Remember, there are no standards. So this is a true statement. It leverages best practices in safety impact analysis and builds upon dozens of Waymo's safety publications. So in other words, there are no standards, so we're doing whatever the hell we want, providing an unprecedented level of transparency within the autonomous driving industry. So inquiring minds contrast these statements with the redactions of every single comment Waymo provided in response to the NHTSA ODI request for safety data. I don't think that that's really got a lot to do with transparency. So to be transparent with us, Waymo, give us something we can use. Give us the data that you're recording every day. Let us know how your vehicles are performing compared to the standards that you built into the design and the design requirements, and then show us that it makes sense. Please, we'd like to support your operations. You haven't killed anybody yet. We'd like that to be the case forever. And we'd like to see your rationale for that and help you stay safe. Thank you. That's it.
I figured out why they have co-CEOs, because in case they're hedging their bets in case the laws improve in this country. And when it comes time for someone to go to jail, they'll be like, you're it. And they two straws of who's going to
Well,
jail.
maybe one of the
Oh my God. Yeah. See a CEO going to jail. Ha. That's the best joke on the podcast, right?
Okay, before we get into recalls, somewhat related to this is from WSB TV 2 Atlanta. The article is titled Different Rules for Humans and Robots. The Atlanta Police Department says court system cannot process citations for Waymo, and we've been listening to Anthony all these years. Who gets the ticket? This is basically saying, hey, if you're an autonomous vehicle, you can do whatever the hell you want because there's not a human driver to get a ticket. Quoting from the article. The standard reads in part, this is the Atlanta Police Standard Operating Procedure. The court system is currently unable to process traffic citations for AVs with no human operator. If the vehicle violates a traffic law where a citation would be warranted, the officer must write a report providing the details surrounding the incident and the law that was violated. You know, cops are really well known for, hey, I'll write a report without a person there. Yeah, let me do this. That's...
So this is kind of tough to get around. I guess state law is a problem here. There's just everything is connected to a person. But, I wonder how they do this. Like, for instance, if they're giving a parking ticket to, these aren't parking tickets, these are operating tickets. But if you're giving a ticket to a corporate actor, a corporate truck, that type of thing, are there really no ways to cite Waymo for traffic citations? I mean, is there really not a way, or is this just a problem because the police can't figure it out, the court can't process it? I don't know. It seems like, obviously our legal system is way behind technology and is catching up, but this seems like a pretty simple fix, right?
Yeah.
If there's an autonomous vehicle that's violating traffic law, you cite the company and not the human. How hard is that?
That's what New York City does, because when the woman I live with gets a speed ticket through an automated camera, it sends it to me as the listed owner of the vehicle, but I wasn't even in the car. So it's, the owner.
It doesn't seem very difficult. It seems like they've just kind of thrown their hands up and decided not to push back on violations. But, for all we know, Waymo hasn't had that many traffic violations. We'll see.
Well, it could be that they use the same camera company that they use at the Coldplay concert, and they just detect love, and that's why you got the ticket instead of your wife.
That could be it. Let's jump to recalls. Chrysler, 121,398 vehicles. The 2023 to 2024 Jeep Grand Cherokee L, the same thing without the L. When measured, the top of the head restraint located in the outboard designated seat, it's something with a head restraint. There's too many numbers involved. My brain gets sleepy. Their head restraint is designed wrong.
Yeah, basically, there's got to be some type of there has to be a way for the head restraint to lock in an upright position so that if it is in a crash, it can't move around and not protect the occupant. And so this is not only, a safety defect from that perspective, I think it also violates Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 202, which applies to the head restraints. And essentially the head restraint can come forward, or it can, people underestimate just how important head restraints are. In fact, there are a lot of active head restraints that are built into vehicles now because traditional head restraints really aren't protective enough of the spinal and head area and crashes, and active head restraints can do a lot more to prevent injury in those areas. In this case, you might as well not have a head restraint at all. And Chrysler is going to, it's Jeep who these are Jeeps that this is happening to, are going to have to do a fix. It looks like they're going to replace the head restraint for these vehicles, and owners, although this recall is coming out now, owners aren't going to hear about it until September 5th. So it's not clear when you'll be able to get this recall performed, hopefully sometime in early September if they have the new part ready, because it appears this applies to a lot of Grand Cherokees, and they may have to redesign their headrest in order to provide a recall part.
All right, moving on. Next up, Hyundai. 4,754 vehicles, the 2023 to 2025 Genesis G90 and the Genesis GB60. Upon vehicle startup, the instrument panel cluster may be temporarily blank due to erroneous software logic. Uh-oh. So they didn't do some testing, is my guess. And it's not quite the rear view camera, but it is the infotainment. So,
well, I mean, you're starting your vehicle and you're about to back up. I wonder if it affects it. But
oh no, it didn't say anything like that. Don't even try to force it.
Like that. So I'm not gonna do that. But it certainly could impact it. But essentially, they're going to be in violation of FMVSS 101 here because you're turning on your car, and a lot of things like your speedometer and other systems that show up on your dashboard aren't going to be showing up. So it looks like they figured this out in April 2025 and upgraded it, but it's hard to tell from the way they've typed out this chronology. At any rate, the owners should be hearing about this one in mid-September, and they'll be getting a software to logic update. I don't know if some of these are kind of the fancy Hyundai vehicles. These are the Genesis. So I don't know if they have over-the-air updates yet.
I don't know.
But it looks like it's going to be a software update.
All right, moving on. Winnebago. 2,119 vehicles. Winnebago, a rare entrant. The 2025 to 2026 Winnebago Revel Sport. The 2024 to 2025 Winnebago Beta. 2024 to 2026 Winnebago View. Then there's a bunch of others, and I'm not going to keep listing them off because we can be here forever. On certain Winnebago vehicles, there may be improper wiring routing under the driver or passenger seat, which can result in damage to wires related to the airbag. Oh. The wiring for their airbag goes under their seat, I guess, underneath the floorboards. Like,
this is just there's a lot of lack of oversight over modifications done to these chassis that are bought by companies and then modified with a giant house on top of them. Essentially, is how
Winnebago doesn't
RVs are built.
Winnebago doesn't make the chassis itself. You don't think?
No,
they're buying it.
They usually buy those, and so they don't have to pass a lot of Federal Motor Vehicle Safety standards because those have essentially already been passed by the original chassis manufacturer. And in this case, it's just a bonehead design where if you're adjusting one of your front seats, it's going to hit the cable that controls whether or not your airbag deploys, which should be a cable that's very well protected. And is clearly not in this situation. And it looks like they've known about this problem since June of last year. They issued an internal campaign, and then, earlier last month, they just said, "Oh, wait, we found out that production failed to follow the campaign rework instructions." So they issued an internal campaign, and apparently no one paid attention to it, and they kept producing defective vehicles. So not a good look for Winnebago. It looks like they're going to be taking your Winnebago and putting correct wire routing. A better way of routing the wires will be provided than through a seat that can move.
They're not going to take my Winnebago from my cold dead hands.
Yeah. That's going to be out to the owners in late September, so be on the lookout for that.
Do you think Winnebago, they'll start putting green smiley faces and red frowny faces in their offices? No. Okay. Last recall. Fred, guess who the last recall is from? Take a wild guess. Wild guess.
I'm going with Mirror.
What? No, it's Ford. Ford. Oh. It's 23,111 vehicles.
I think I've been listening to our president too much. I'm not making any sense anymore.
The 2025 Lincoln Aviator. Let's see. During a global close operation activated using the key fob or the Lincoln Way mobile application, the side rear power-operated windows may not automatically reverse when encountering an object while closing after exerting an upward force. So the windows, this is the choking hazard stop thing, right? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this is the FMDSS 118, which was put into play in the early 2000s, essentially to protect children who were being, and some pets who were being killed or injured by power windows rolling up on their necks or other parts of their bodies. It was, the regulation that NHTSA put into effect allowed for an automatic reverse to be used as part of these systems. And in this case, it's a little, in modern vehicles, this problem becomes a little scarier. Like if you look at the description of the defect here, they talk about the Lincoln Way mobile application, which has a global close operation, which means you could functionally be, anywhere in America, right? And hit the global close and your vehicle's windows are going to roll up and your doors are going to lock, supposedly, while you're not even there to monitor if there's, a person inside the vehicle. So that's troublesome in itself. So if you have that system, you definitely need windows that automatically reverse if they encounter an object while closing.
Or that's the perfect way to commit a murder. I wasn't even there.
I wasn't even there. It's a terrible, it's an awful thing when it happens, just because it's just, the stories from parents and other folks who were involved in those incidents when they occurred were just awful. So it's even more troubling when you see the ability to remotely roll up windows coming into play when there's presumably no one there to see what's going on. But this is going to be fixed, I think, with a software update, and it's on the driver and passenger door software modules, and owners should be able to get that fixed sometime in late September.
All right, and with that, Jim Farley, please come on the show anytime you want. Would love to talk about why we can remotely roll up our windows while sitting in Belize in our cars in Nebraska. And with that, thanks, listeners. Go to autosafety.org, click on donate, give 5-star ratings to this. Tell all your friends, families, neighbors, dogs, whoever. And until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.